Fortunately, her blue jeans were dark, not stonewashed, and highly reflective, and her sweater was cranberry red, which was not as bad as if it had been white or yellow, and her hair was not blonde but dark. Yet she could have felt no more visible if she had been trying to run to cover in a wedding dress. He would be focused on the Honda, surprised to see it angled across both lanes. He wouldn't immediately glance to either side of the highway, and when his attention did flicker away from the car, he was likely to look to the right where the Honda had run off the road and struck the tree, not to the left where China was seeking shelter. Telling herself that she was safe and had not been seen, but not actually believing herself, she reached the first phalanx of massive redwoods. They grew astonishingly close to one another, considering their daunting size. She slipped around the deeply corrugated trunk of a 15-foot diameter giant that thrived in such intimacy with an even larger specimen that the passageway between the towering pair was less than 2 feet. The lowest branches above her were 150 to 180 feet off the ground, visible only when lightning backlit them. Standing between these trunks was rather like standing between the nave columns of a cathedral, too large ever be built this side of heaven. The bristled boughs formed majestic vaults 15 stories overhead. From her damp and cloistered retreat she peered out warily at the highway. Beyond the lacy screen of low ferns, silver plating the rain and growing brighter by the second, came the headlights of the motorhome. They were accompanied by the soft peal of air brakes. Mr. Vest stops on the pavement as the shoulder is neither wide enough nor firm enough to accommodate his motorhome. Although this scenic highway is obviously little used in these hours before dawn, and in such foul weather as this, he is loath to block traffic any longer than is absolutely necessary. He well knows the California Vehicle Code. He pushes the gear shift into park, engages the emergency brake, but leaves the engine running and the headlights on. He doesn't bother to slip into his raincoat, and when he gets out of the motorhome, he leaves the door standing open. The rain on the pavement is a drumming, and on the metal of the vehicles a singing, and on the foliage of the trees a chorus chanting wordlessly. The rain sounds please him, as does the chill, as does the fecund smell of ferns and loamy soil. This is the same Honda that passed him a few minutes earlier. He is not surprised to see it in this sorry condition, considering the reckless speed at which it had been traveling. Evidently the car had skidded off the road and into the tree. Then the driver had backed it onto the pavement again before the engine failed. But where is the driver? Another motorist might have come along from the west and taken any injured person to get medical treatment, but that seems too fortuitous and too timely. After all, the accident can't have happened more than a minute or two ago. The driver's door is open, and when Vest leans inside, he sees that the keys are in the ignition. The windshield wipers sweep the glass. The taillights, the interior ceiling light, and the gauges in the instrument panel are all aglow. He steps away from the car and looks at the tree toward which the tire tracks lead. The bark is scarred from the impact, but only superficially. Intrigued, he surveys the rest of the grove on that side of the highway. Quite possibly, the driver climbed out of the wrecked car, dazed from a blow of the head, and wandered into the redwoods. Even now, she might be traveling farther into the primeval grove, lost and confused, or maybe having collapsed from injuries, she lies unconscious in a fern glade. The closely grown trees form a maze of narrow corridors, more wood than open space. Even at high noon, on a cloudless day, sunshine would penetrate to the forest floor, only in a few thin, bright blades, and stubborn darkness would impose itself in most of these deep reaches, as though each of the many hundreds of thousands of nights since the grove's beginning had left its residue of shadows. Now, still on the witching side of dawn, that blackness is so pure that it seems almost like a thing alive, crouching and predatory and yet welcoming. This special darkness stirs Mr. Vest and makes him yearn for experiences that he senses are available to him, but that he cannot imagine. Experiences that are mysterious and transforming, yet which he cannot even dimly envision. Far into the redwoods, down corridors of fissured bark, and some secret citadel of bestial passion, where shadows dwell that are older than human history, a mystical adventure awaits. If the woman, in fact, is wandering in the woods, he could park the motorhome and search for her. Perhaps the knife that he found at the service station is an omen after all, and hers may be the blood that he is meant to draw with that blade. He imagines what it would be like to take off his clothes and enter the grove naked with the knife, relying solely on his primitive instincts to stalk her and bring her down. The rain and mist cold on his skin, the air steaming once he has breathed it, unchilled by the rain but imparting his heat to the night, tearing ferociously at the woman's clothes as he drags her to the forest floor. He is already erect with the dream of it, but he wonders if he would attack her first with knife or phallus, or perhaps with his teeth. That decision would be made in the moment of capture, and much would depend on how attractive she was. But he is convinced that whatever might happen between them would be unprecedented and mysterious and inexpressibly intense. Dawn is coming in an hour or so, however, and he would be wise to be on his way. He must put more distance between himself and the places where he took his entertainment during the night. Being good at being edge vest requires, among other qualities, the ability to repress his most ardent passions when indulgence in them is dangerous. If he instantly gratified every desire, he would be less a man than an animal, and either long dead or imprisoned. Being edge vest means being free but not reckless, being quick but not impulsive. He must have a sense of proportion and good timing. Hell, he needs the timing of a tap dance master, and a nice smile. A truly nice smile combined with self-control can take a person a long way. He smiles at the forest. The motorhome stood on the pavement, approximately 20 feet from the battered Honda, shrunken in appearance because the redwoods dwarfed it. As the killer had walked down the roadway to the abandoned car through the headlight beams from the motorhome, China had crept upslope through the dark forest, moving parallel to him, but in the opposite direction. She had circled behind the tree to the right of her, gripping the revolver in her right hand, with her left hand flat against the trunk for balance, in case she stumbled over a root or other obstruction. Under her palm, she had felt the deep pattern of repetitive Gothic arches formed by the fissures in the thick bark. With each uncertain step that she had taken around this great easy curve, she had felt that the tree was less like a tree than like a building, a windowless fortress erected against all the rage of the world. After navigating a hemisphere of the trunk to the shoulder-wide gap between the tree and the neck, she peered out once more. The killer stood near the open door of the Honda, gazing into the forest on the far side of the highway. She was worried that another motorist would come along before she could carry out her plan. She moved on, circling the next tree. It was even larger than the previous behemoth. The bark featured the familiar Gothic patterns. In spite of the shrill wind keening high above and collected drizzles of rain spattering down from the lofty branches, the grove impressed her as a good safe place, dark but not in spirit, cold but not forbidding. She was still alone in her troubles, but curiously, for the first time all night, she didn't feel alone. At the next trunk frame gap in the forest wall, China looked out again and saw the killer getting into the Honda. He would have to move the disabled car out of the way because there wasn't room to drive around it. She glanced at the motorhome, perhaps because she knew what lay within, a dead man closeted in chains, a dead woman swaddled in a white shroud. The vehicle seemed as ominous as any war machine. She could just wait in the grove, forget about her plan. He would leave and life would go on. So easy to wait, survive. The police would find the girl, Ariel, somehow, in time, without the need for heroics. China leaned against the tree, suddenly weak and shaking and almost physically ill with despair, with fear. The taillights and interior lights of the Honda dimmed with the grinding of the starter as the killer tried to get the engine to turn over. Then another noise came to China, much closer than the car. Behind her. A rustle, a snap, a soft snort like a startled horse exhaling. Frightened, she turned. In the backwash of light from the motor home, out on the highway, China saw angels in the redwood grove, or so it seemed for a moment. Regarding her were gentle faces, pale in the darkness, eyes luminous and inquisitive and kind. But even in that meager moonlight glow, she was unable to sustain a hope of angels. After a brief initial confusion, she realized that these creatures were a breed of coastal elk without antlers. 6 stood together in a 15-foot wide space between this outer row of trees and the deeper growth, so close that China could have been among them in 3 steps. Their noble heads were lifted, ears pricked, gazes fixed intently on her. The elk were curious, but although timid by nature, they seemed oddly unafraid of her. Once for 2 months, she and her mother had stayed on a ranch in Mendocino County, where a group of well-armed survivalists waited for the race wars that they believed would soon destroy the nation, and in that doomsday atmosphere, China had spent as much time as possible exploring the surrounding countryside, hills and vales of singular beauty, groves of pine, golden fields where scattered oaks stood, each alone and huge and black-limbed against the sky, and where small herds of coastal elk appeared from time to time, always keeping at a distance from human beings and their works. She had stalked them, not as a hunter, but with awkward girlish guile, as shy as the elk themselves, but irresistibly attracted to the tranquility and the peace that they radiated, in a world otherwise saturated with violence. In those 2 months, she had never managed to get closer than 80 or 90 feet to the elk herds before they had reacted to her nonchalant approach, witting to farther fields and ridges. Now they had approached her, vigilant but not frightened, as if they were the same elk of her childhood, at long last willing to believe in her peaceable intentions. Coastal elk should have been somewhat closer to the sea in the open meadows beyond the redwoods, where the grass was lush and green from the winter rains, where the grazing was good. Although they were not strangers to the forest, their presence here in the rainy pre-dawn darkness was remarkable. Then she saw others in addition to the herd of 6, one here, one there, and there a third, and still more, between trees at a greater distance than the initial group. Some were barely visible in the bosky grove at the extreme reach of the backwash from the motorhome headlights. But she thought that there were as many as a dozen altogether, all standing at attention, as though transfixed by woodland music beyond human hearing. Lightning spread branches across the sky, put down jagged roots toward the earth, and briefly brightened the grove sufficiently for China to see all the elk more clearly than before. More of them than she had thought. In mist and ferns, among flowering red rhododendron, revealed by fluttering leaves of light, heads lifted, their breath steaming from black nostrils, their eyes fixed on her. She looked out at the highway. The killer had given up trying to start the engine. He put the Honda in gear, and it began to roll backward on the slightly sloped pavement. After one last glance at the elk, China stepped out from between the 2 redwoods. The killer pulled the steering wheel hard to the right, letting the momentum of the car carry it backward in an arc until it was facing downhill. Through sparse ferns and scattered clumps of bunch grass, China approached the highway. The weakness in her legs was gone, and her spasm of irresolution had passed. Under the killer's guidance, the Honda coasted downhill and onto the right shoulder. She could go after him, shoot him in the car, or as he got out of the car, but he was 50 yards away now, 60, and he would surely see her coming. She had no hope of keeping the advantage of surprise, so she would have to shoot to kill, which would do Ariel no good at all, because with this bastard dead, they would still have to search for the girl wherever she was hidden, and they might never find her. Besides, the creep probably had a gun on him, and if this turned into a shooting match, he would win, because he was far more practiced than she was, and bolder. And she had no one to whom she could turn, as in childhood. So now, get out of sight quickly, don't be rash, wait for the ideal situation, pick the moment of the confrontation and control the showdown when it comes. Fierce lightning again and a long hard crash of thunder like vast structures collapsing high in the night. She reached the motorhome. Oh gosh, the driver's door stood open. Oh Jesus, oh gosh. She couldn't do it. She had to do it. Downhill, on the shoulder, with the rattle of twisted steel, the Honda was coasting to a stop. She had the revolver. That made all the difference. She was safe with the gun. Who will save this girl hidden in a cellar? This girl ripening for this son of a bitch bastard freak? This girl like me? Who is ever there for frightened girls hiding in the backs of closets or under beds? Who is ever there but twitching palmetto beetles? Who will be there if not me? Where will I be if not there? Why is this the only choice? And when the answer is so obvious, why even ask why? Downslope, the Honda came to a full stop. With the revolver heavy in her hand, China climbed into the cockpit and behind the steering wheel. She swung around in the driver's seat, got up, and hurried back through the motorhome, murmuring, "Jesus, Jesus," telling herself that it was all right. That's a crazy thing she was doing. All right, because this time she had the revolver. But she wondered if even the gun would give her enough of an edge when the time arrived to go face to face with this man. Of course, a direct confrontation might never have to take place. China intended to hide until they arrived at his house and then find out where the girl was being held. With that information, she would be able to go to the police and they could nail this creep and free Ariel and what? And in saving the girl, she would save herself. From what, she was not sure. From a life of merely surviving, from the endless and fruitless struggle to understand. Crazy, but there was no turning back now. And in her heart, she knew that risking all was less crazy than living a life that had no higher goal than survival. As if thrown forward by the hard knocking of her heart, China reached the rear of the motorhome, the closed door to the only bedroom. Jesus. She didn't want to go in there, with Laura dead, the man in the closet, the sewing kit waiting to be used again. Jesus. But it was the best place to hide, so she opened the door and went in and closed the door behind her and eased to the left through the palpable darkness and put her back against the wall. Maybe he wouldn't drive straight home. He might stop at some point between here and there to come to the back of the motorhome and have a look at his trophies. Then she would kill him the instant that he stepped through the door, empty the revolver into him, take no chances. With him dead, they might never find Ariel, or they might find her only after she had perished of starvation, an excruciatingly painful way to die. Nevertheless, if the killer entered this bedroom, China wouldn't rely on half measures. She would not attempt to wound him and keep him alive for police interrogation, not in this tight space with him looming over her, and with so many ways that things could go wrong. Lights off, windshield wipers off, Edgeler Vest sits in the dead car by the side of the road, thinking. There are numerous ways that he can proceed from here. Life is always a laden buffet of treats, a vast smorgasbord, groaning with infinite choices of sensations and experiences to thrill the heart, but never more so than now. He wishes to exploit the opportunity to the fullest possible extent, to extract from it the greatest possible excitement and the most poignant sensations, and he must therefore not act precipitously. Luck had given him a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, as fleet as a deer across the blacktop, hesitating at the open door of the motorhome and then up and inside and out of sight. She must be the woman from the Honda. When she passed him earlier, he had looked down through the windshield of her car and had seen her red sweater. In the accident, she might have received a hard blow to the head. Now perhaps she is dazed, confused, frightened. This would explain why she doesn't approach him directly and ask for help or for a ride to the nearest service station. If her thoughts are addled, the irrational decision to become a stowaway aboard the motorhome might seem perfectly reasonable to her. She did not appear to be suffering from a head injury, however, or any injury at all. She hadn't staggered or stumbled across the highway, but had been swift and sure-footed. At this distance and in the rearview mirror, Vess wouldn't have been able to see blood, even if she had been bleeding. But he knows intuitively that there was no blood. The longer he considers the situation, the more it seems to him that the accident was staged. But why? If the motive had been robbery, she would have accosted him the moment that he stepped onto the highway. Besides, he isn't driving one of those elaborate $300,000 land yachts that, by their very flashiness, advertise their contents to thieves. His vehicle is 17 years old and, though well maintained, worth considerably less than $50,000. seems pointless to wreck a relatively new Honda for the purpose of looting the contents of an aging vehicle that promises no treasures. He has left his keys in the ignition, the engine running. She already could have driven away in the motorhome if that had been her intention. And a woman alone on a lonely highway at night is not likely to be planning a robbery. Such behavior doesn't fit any criminal profile. He is baffled deeply. Mr. Vess's simple life is not often touched by mystery. There are things that can be killed and things that can't. Some things are harder to kill than others, and some are more fun to kill than others. Some scream, some weep, some do both, some only tremble silently and wait for the end, as if having spent their whole lives in anticipation of this awful pain. Thus the days go by, pleasantly straightforward, a river of raw sensation upon which enigma seldom sets sail. But this woman in a red sweater is an enigma, all right. As mysterious and intriguing as anyone Mr. Vess has ever known. What experiences he will have with her are difficult to imagine, and he is excited by the prospect of such novelty. He gets out of the Honda and closes the door. For a moment he stands staring at the forest in the cold rain, hoping to appear unsuspecting if the woman should be watching him from inside the motorhome. Maybe he is wondering what happened to the driver of the Honda. Maybe he is a good citizen, concerned about her and considering a search of the woods. Multiple bolts of lightning chase across the sky, as white and jagged as running skeletons. The subsequent blasts of thunder are so powerful that they rattle through Mr. Vess's bones, a vibration that he finds most agreeable. Unfazed by the storm, several elk suddenly appear from out of the forest, drifting between the trees and into the bordering sward of ferns. They move with stately grace, in a silence that is ethereal behind the fading echo of thunder, eyes shining in the backwash of the headlight beams. They seem almost to be apparitions rather than real animals. 2, 5, 7, and yet more of them appear. Some stop as though posing, and others move farther, but then stop as well, until now a dozen or more are revealed and standing still, and every one of them is staring at Mr. Vess. Their beauty is unearthly, and killing them would be enormously satisfying. If he had one of his guns at hand, he would shoot as many of them as he could manage before they bolted beyond range. As a young boy, he began his work with animals. Actually, he'd begun with insects, but soon he had moved on to turtles and lizards, and then to cats and larger species. As a teenager, as soon as he had gotten a driver's license, he had roamed back roads some nights and in the early mornings before school, shooting deer if he spotted any, stray dogs, cows in fields, and horses in corrals if he was certain that he could get away with it. He is flushed with nostalgia at the thought of killing these elk. The sight of their blood would intensify the redness of his own and make his arteries sing. Though usually reticent and easily spooked, the elk stare boldly at him. They do not seem to be watching with alarm, are not in the least skittish or poised to flee. Indeed, their directness strikes him as strange. Uncharacteristically, he feels uneasy. Anyway, the woman in the red sweater awaits him, and she is more interesting than any number of elk. He is a grown man now, no longer a boy, and his quest for intense experiences cannot be satisfactorily conducted along the byways of the past. Ezra Vess has long ago put aside childish things. He returns to the motorhome. At the door, he sees that the woman is neither the pilot nor the co-pilot's, is in neither the pilot's nor the co-pilot's position. Swinging in behind the steering wheel, he glances back, but can see no sign of her in the lounge or the dining area. The short and shadowy hall at the end appears deserted as well. Facing forward, but keeping his eyes on the rearview mirror, he opens the tambour-top console between the seats. His pistol is there where he left it, sans silencer. Pistol in hand, he swivels in his chair, gets up, and moves back through the motorhome to the kitchen and dining area. The butcher knife found on the service station blacktop lies on the counter as before. He opens the cabinet to the left of the oven and discovers that the 12-gauge Mossberg is securely in its spring clamps, to which he returned it after killing the 2 clerks. He doesn't know if she is armed with a weapon of her own, From the distance at which he'd seen her, he hadn't been able to discern whether she was empty-handed or, equally important, whether she was attractive enough to be a fun kill. Farther back, then, through his narrow domain, with special caution at the end of the dining nook, behind which lies the stepwell, she's not crouched here either. Into the hall, the sound of rain, the idling engine. He opens the bathroom door, quickly and noisily, aware that stealth is impossible in this reverberant tin can on wheels. The cramped bathroom is as it should be, no stowaway on the pot or in the shower stall. Next, the shallow wardrobe with its sliding door, but she isn't in there either. The only place remaining to be searched is the bedroom. Beth stands before this last closed door, positively enchanted by the thought of the woman huddling in there, unaware of those with whom she shares her hiding place. No thread of light is visible along the threshold or the jamb, so she no doubt entered in darkness. Evidently she has not yet sat upon the bed and found the sleeping beauty. Perhaps she has edged warily around the small room and by blind exploration has discovered the folding door to the closet. Perhaps if Vess opens this bedroom door, she will simultaneously pull aside those vinyl panels and attempt to slip swiftly and quietly into the closet, only to feel a strange cold form hanging there instead of sports shirts. Mr. Vess is amused. The temptation to throw open the door is almost irresistible, to see her roam off the body in the closet, then to the bed, then away from the dead girl, screaming first at the sewn-shut face of the boy, and then at the manacled girl, and then at Vess himself, in a comic pinball spin of terror. Following that spectacle, however, they will have to get down to issues at once. He will quickly learn who she is and what she thinks she's doing here. Mr. Vess realizes that he doesn't want this rare experience with mystery to end. He finds it more pleasing to prolong the suspense and chew on the puzzle for a while. He was beginning to feel weary from his recent activities. Now he is energized by these unexpected developments. Certain risks are involved, of course, in playing it this way, but it is impossible to live with intensity and avoid risk. Risk is at the heart of an intense existence. He backs quietly away from the bedroom door. Noisily, he steps into the bathroom, takes a piss, and flushes the toilet, so the woman will think that he came to the back of the motorhome, not in search of her, but to answer the call of nature. If she continues to believe that her presence is unknown, she will proceed on whatever course of action brought her here in the first place, and it will be interesting to see what she does. He goes forward again, pausing in the kitchen to pump a cup of hot coffee from the 2-quart thermos on the counter by the cooktop. He also switches on a couple of lights so he'll be able to see the interior clearly in the rearview mirror. Behind the steering wheel once more, he sips the coffee. It is hot, black, and bitter, just the way he likes it. He secures the cup in a holder and bracketed to the dashboard. He tucks the pistol in the open console box between the seats with the safeties off and the butt up. He can put his hand on it in a second, turn in his seat, shoot the woman before she can get near him, and still maintain control of the motorhome. But he doesn't think that she will try to harm him, at least not soon. If harming him was her primary intention, she would have gone after him already. Strange. Why, what now? He says aloud, enjoying the drama of his peculiar situation. What now? What next? Well, surprise, surprise. He drinks more coffee. The aroma reminds him of the crisp texture of burned toast outside the Alcargon. A night of mysteries. The mounting wind lashes the long fronds of the ferns. Like evidence of violence, bright wet rhododendron blossoms spray through the night. The forest stands untouched. The power of time is stored in those massive dark vertical forms. Mr. Vess shifts the motorhome out of park and releases the emergency brake. Onward. After he cruises past the damaged Honda, he glances at the rearview mirror. The bedroom door remains closed. The woman is in hiding. With the motorhome rolling again, perhaps the stowaway will risk turning on a light and will take this opportunity to meet her roommates. Mr. Vess smiles. Of all the expeditions that he's conducted, this is the most interesting and exciting. And it isn't over yet. China sat on the floor in the darkness. Her back was against the wall. The revolver lay at her side. She was untouched and alive. China Shepherd, untouched and alive, she whispered, and this was both a prayer and a joke. Throughout her childhood, she frequently prayed earnestly for that double blessing, her virtue and her life, and her prayers were often as rambling and incoherent as they were frantic. Eventually, she had worried that God was growing weary of her endless, desperate pleas for deliverance, that he was sick of her inability to take care of herself and stay out of trouble, and that he might decide that she had used up all of the divine mercy allotted to her. God was busy, after all, running the entire universe, watching over so many drunks and fools, with the devil working mischief everywhere, volcanoes erupting, sailors lost in storms, sparrows falling. By the time China was 10 or 11, in consideration of God's hectic schedule, she had condensed her rambling pleas in times of terror to this: God, this is China Shepherd here in, fill in the blank with the name of the current place, and I'm begging you, please, 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 just let me get through this untouched and alive. Soon, realizing that God, being God, would know precisely where she was, she reduced her entreaty further to: God, this is China Shepherd. Please get me through this untouched and alive. Finally, certain that God was exasperatedly familiar with her panicky presumptions on his time and grace, she had shortened her plea to a telegraphic minimum: China Shepherd, untouched and alive. In crises, under beds or lost in closets, behind concealing clothes, or in cobwebbed attics smelling of dust and raw wood, or once flattened against the ground in a mire of rat shit in the crawl space under a moldering old house, she had whispered those 5 words or chanted them silently over and over, indefatigably: China Shepherd, untouched and alive, ceaselessly reciting them, not because she was afraid that God might be distracted by other business and failed to hear her, but to remind herself that he was out there, had received her message, and would take care of her if she was patient. And when each crisis passed, when the black flood of terror receded, when her stuttering heart finally began to speak each beat clearly and calmly again, she had repeated the 5 words once more, but with a different inflection than she had used previously, not as a plea for deliverance this time, but as a dutiful report: China Shepherd, untouched and alive. Much as a sailor in wartime might report to his captain after the ship had survived a vigorous strafing by enemy planes: all present and accounted for, sir. She was present, she was accounted for, and she let God know of her gratitude with the same 5 words, figuring that he would hear the difference in her inflection and would understand. It had become a little joke with young China, and sometimes she had even accompanied the report with a salute, which seemed alright because she had figured that God, being God, must have a sense of humor. China Shepherd, untouched and alive. This time, from the motorhome bedroom, it was simultaneously a report on her survival and a fervent prayer to be spared from whatever brutality might be coming next. China Shepherd, untouched and alive. As a little girl, she had loathed her name, except when she had been praying to survive. It was frivolous, a stupid misspelling of a real word, and when other kids teased her about it, she wasn't able to mount a defense. Considering that her mother was called Anne, such a stupid name, such a simple name, the choice of China seemed not merely frivolous, but thoughtless and even mean. During most of the time that Anne was pregnant, she had lived in a commune of radical environmentalists, a cell of the infamous Earth Army, who believed that any degree of violence was justifiable in defense of nature. They had spiked trees with the hope that loggers would lose hands in accidents with power saws. They had burned down 2 meatpacking plants and the hapless night watchmen in them, sabotaged the construction equipment at new housing tracts that encroached upon the wilds, and killed a scientist at Stanford because they disapproved of his use of animals in his laboratory experiments. Influenced by these friends, Anne Shepherd had considered many names for her daughter: Hyacinth, Meadow, Ocean, Sky, Snow, Rain, Leaf, Butterfly. By the time she had given birth, however, she had moved on from the Earth Army, and she had named China after China because, as she had once explained, "Honey, I just realized one day that China is the only just society on Earth, and it seemed like a beautiful name." She had never been able to recall why she changed the I to Y. though by then she had been a working partner in a methamphetamine lab, packaging speed in affordable $5 hits and sampling the merchandise often enough to have been left with a few blank days in her memory. Only when praying for deliverance had young China liked her name, because she had figured that God would remember her more easily for it, would not get her confused with the millions of Marys and Carolines and Lindas and Heathers and Tracys and Janes. Now her name no longer dismayed or pleased her. It was just a name, like any other. She had learned that who she was, the true person she was, had nothing whatsoever to do with her name, and little to do with the life that she'd led with her mother for 16 years. She couldn't be blamed for the dreadful hates and lusts she had seen, for the obscenities heard, for the crimes witnessed, or for the things that some of her mother's male friends had wanted from her. She was not defined either by a name or by shameful experience. Instead, she was formed by dreams and hopes, by aspirations, by self-respect and perseverance. She wasn't clay in the hands of others. She was rock, and with her own determined hands, she could sculpt the person that she wanted to be. She hadn't reached this realization until a year ago, when she was 25. The wisdom had come to her not in a dazzling flash, but slowly, in the way that a plot of bare earth is covered gradually by creeping ajuga, until one day, as if miraculously, the brown dirt is gone, and everywhere are emerald green leaves and tiny blue flowers. Worthwhile knowledge always seemed hard-won, while the winning was in progress, but seemed easily acquired in retrospect. The old motorhome lumbered through the night, creaking like a long sealed door, ticking like a rusted clock too corroded to register every second faithfully toward dawn. Crazy to be taking this trip, but nowhere else to go. This was where her entire life had been leading. Reckless courage wasn't restricted to the battlefield or to men. She was wet and cold and frightened, and strangely, for the first time in her life, she was at peace with herself. "Ariel," China said softly, one girl in the darkness speaking reassuringly to another.